us. Thank you.
Morena tātou, ka mīnoi tātou. E o ngā mano, a tēnei te whakamuimatatu ki a koe mō tēnei huhu ngā mātou, arahina mai ki au, ki te tika, ki te puni a mātou, tukoa mai tō wairua tapu hei manaki, hei awhi, he tiaki o ki a mātou. Anei mātou e tuohu nēmu i tō aroaru, a ka tuku i tēnei inui i rungi i tingo tō mātou kaipakora i Kraiti. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that. Okay, let's get cracking. So we have... I want to thank everyone for being here today. I have got an apology from Councillor Foster and Councillor Robinson. Can I have a mover for that, please?
Can I speak following?
No. So I've got a mover and a seconder, Councillor Burdett, Councillor Cranston, all in favour. Contrary, carried. Councillor Burdett, you desperately wants to address us.
I'll follow your orders, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I just wanted to stand and acknowledge the staff and the job they did at the opening of the Hicks Bay playground. I suppose that's what you call it. There's a new toilet. It was a brilliant day. Staff did an excellent job. Nadine was there. They had a barbecue and the kids came across from the Kura just across the road. After the old minister said a few prayers, they poured onto that ground and it was a delight to see. I suppose there would have been 70 or 80 kids, but all in all, due credit to the council and to the locals up there in a combined effort. That's what can happen when everyone comes together and they work towards one goal. It's taken a long time, but they achieved it.
Thank you for that, Councillor Burdett. Thank you, Nadine, and please convey our thanks to your staff as well. Declarations of interest. Leave of absence. Acknowledgement and tributes. Public input deputations, extraordinary business, notices of motion, adjourned business. I take us all to page 4. So thank you, Councillor Worsnop, for preparing 2 remits. And so we will discuss those today. The process is set out quite clear. If we decide to go forward with these, I take them to Zone 2 next Friday in Cambridge, where I will present them to my fellow mayors in Zone 2, and hopefully we get Zone 2 support. I can also, if that fail, I can also reach out to all mayors or our Zone 3 mayors, but I'm quite confident that we will find that support. If we then find that support, it is handed over to Local Government New Zealand before the 14th of May. Thank you, Heather, for keeping us on time. So I'm going to ask you to speak to your first remit, give a quick summary, and then thank you, Yannick and Joe, for giving us some summaries. If there are any questions of staff, Joe, will you be able to answer that? So Kerry, I'm going to open the floor and you talk to, we're just going to focus on our first remit, the forestry one for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Your Worship. For me, this is probably the remit that there's a little bit more certainty around the urgency of bringing a topic like this, just the times that we live in, some of the anomalies that have quite recently come through and the changes of valuation that led to us then having to increase the differential. I've had really good support from a number of different people that I've contacted about this, both within LGNZ, a Hawke's Bay valuation consultant who's had a lot to do with the forest sector and was a presenter at the recent Dana Forestry Conference. So I feel like the information that we've got is pretty solid. The issue is broadly, everyone that I've approached has said it's topical. It's acknowledged that there is an issue. Nobody's made any bones about the fact that it's complex and it won't be easy to resolve, if it's even possible. So really, I think as a council, what we're expressing is we're acknowledging the fact that there's something not right here, and it needs looking into by the people that the country tasks with addressing these issues, which is noted in here is the Valuer General. I do have a little bit of a query, and Pat may know more than me on this, in terms of the wording of the actual remit, because I'm not sure that the Valuer General does legislation, whether they can advise on what changes to the legislation could be. So that was a query that I did have to put to everyone. Oh, yeah. Sorry, that I'm also happy to move that the remit be accepted.
Thank you. Moved by councillor Worsnop, seconded by councillor Faulkner. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The intention is great. I would have just thought, though, that the remit should end without the comment around purchasing power and profitability of the sector, because that's actually script that actually is backbone and substance to supporting the remit, but doesn't necessarily need to be in the remit, because really we are asking LGNZ to request the Valuer General to amend the relevant legislation to allow for local government, well, to allow for local government. It should be to allow the rating of forestry land on the same basis as other land with capital development, because that's what we're talking about. And Madam Chair, what I was concerned about is why the remit is not in the recommendations, because the way it's scripted at the minute, it leaves it completely separate from the recommendation. So I would have liked to have seen the staff report actually have the remit in it, because that's my pet hobby horse, as you know, that we can make a decision, we record the recommendation, and the recommendation says approve the remit. But Joe Bloggs, who's reading this, won't necessarily have the remit at their fingertips. So it should have had the remit in the recommendations, I would have suggested. So I think what we are really saying is that we would like the Valuer General, because it's the issue of it only valued on land value that you're attacking. And that's the cause for us to have to use the multiplier with respect to the roading rate. So isn't it that we request the Valuer General to amend the relevant legislation to allow for forestry land to be related on the same value as other capital value, as other land valuations, because that's what we're asking for. We just need to tidy the words up while other people speak to it. Can we think about that?
Any other, oh my goodie, look at all the hands. Councillor Wharehinga goes first, and then whose hand was that? Councillor Dowsing, thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I just want to stand up and speak in support of this paper. I think it's a really, really important discussion for us to be having. The forestry sector has inequitably less rates to pay, and our only ability to be able to fund things is via rates. So we're really hamstrung by the legislation that we have at the moment. So making this, changing this inside the legislation would make this equitable across all land uses in our region, and that will give our council the ability to actually deliver on the roading needs that our communities often talk to us about. So I'm absolutely in support of this paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Again, I'm in support, but I just wanted to touch on Councillor Seymour's point, which is that we've summarised the wrong thing in the report. A summary of what a remit is not relevant for the paper. A summary of what the remit entails should have been in the front page. Yeah, to just tidy the process up. Thank you.
Councillor Worsnop.
All right, so taking into consideration Councillor Seymour's comments, we can look to amend that remit to say that Local Government New Zealand requests the Valuer General amend the relevant legislation to allow for local government to address the growing disparities between the rating valuation of forestry land and other land uses.
You've got that, Coral? So can we please make that recommendation number 2, so that the wording is in there, so that when we move it, everyone is sure what is in the remit. So Kerry, can you just read that again so Coral can? Yep, Coral will read. Okay, is the seconder happy with that? Okay, so I've got a mover and a seconder, councillor Worsnop and councillor Faulkner. And Coral has just read it out. So all in favour, contrary, carried. Thank you. So then we move on to the next remit, and again the same. We will have the wording of the remit as number 2 in the recommendation. Councillor Worsnop, do you want to say a few words in regards to that?
The standing thing.
Good.
So this remit is a little bit less straightforward in terms of it's mostly come out of ongoing conversations between ourselves at various different times with regards to what has obviously always been an issue with rubbish being dumped and council then therefore having to clean it up. I take on board a lot of the staff comments and that it's not necessarily an answer. It's not potentially going to eliminate the problem or potentially even decrease it by half or 3/4. I think why I still support some action in this area is because I do think the community needs to have better visibility of what this is costing us. You know, you really only need one case where we go, hey, thanks for that rubbish, but we've cleaned it up and now here's your $1,200 bill. You know, for that to be in the paper, suddenly you have people thinking about what it actually costs when they do something like that. Whereas when you hand a punitive fine, it's, oh, I got a fine. You know, that's quite different in terms of the narrative that we want our community to own. I actually am surprised to see that the cost actually hasn't been increasing year on year. So Pauline has made that information available to say that actually it's pretty flat. We haven't seen, you know, huge increases. It's pretty consistent around roughly $85,000 a year, which is still substantial. And I did want some feedback potentially on whether it's focusing on fly tipping is broad enough. Do we have the capacity to use something like this for the likes of the whiteware that gets dropped outside the recyclers, for the likes of properties where their own scrap is, you know, falling out onto the roadside and we have no means of cleaning it up without having a huge cost? Is it possible for us to encapsulate things that we would like to do but don't have the money to do in something like this? So it's not strictly fly tipping, it's our ability to clean up rubbish on public land and share that cost burden with those who have had the appropriate amount of notice to deal with it themselves and have failed to. So yeah, I believe there's a little bit more to this one and would be more than happy to take feedback or amendments.
Okay, any questions or?
Move this report, but like I say, subject to amendments if needed.
Yep.
Excuse me, Your Worship, was staff going to respond to Councillor Worsnop's? Thank you.
So just with reference, through Your Worship, in terms of the that particular issue, so it intersects with a number of bylaws, and so with the roading reserve as well as part of that. So it's not as straightforward to try and address it through this particular mechanism. So that, yeah, that has multiple issues, not just related to fly tipping alone. So I'd say this, yeah.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to second this remit, and I think we should leave this remit as it is for the moment and let it deal specifically with fly tipping. But that sum of money that we're spending now is quite a large sum of money. So if there can be some increases in fines where it can be discovered, as this idea remit suggests, look at the issue of Makarori in the last few weeks. The number of times council have had to send people out there to pick up bags of litter that have been left under the trees along Makarori Beach. If there is something that identifies the individual who's left that rubbish there, then that is something that would be captured by this. So I completely support the remit as it is, and I'm happy to second it. Thank you.
Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I do also support this in ethos. I did want to know if fly tipping would actually extend to the whiteware stuff on Stanley Road, because in places like Stanley Road, because that's the thing that I get hit up most about actually, and it's a huge eyesore for our community and for visitors here being taken to the beach by our community. So I did want to know if this would actually be able to be applied in that regard. It makes sense to me if there's a hot spot that people are just dumping things at, but also I do hear and I do acknowledge that the last thing we want to do is put in a mechanism that the community thinks will do one thing and actually doesn't do that thing, because that's the other thing as well, because the community talked to me about that specific issue a lot. I would hate to, oh, not hate, but it'd be remiss of me to support this thinking it's going to solve that, and then the community go to me, hey, you've done nothing about this, and I think that I have, but actually I haven't. So would this be able to be applied to that kind of situation, because that's really what's at the forefront of my mind?
No, so my understanding, and unfortunately, Ms. Montgomery is not here to also add to this, but my understanding in that particular issue is because it's happening, so it'll address the fines if we can find the perpetrator for fly tipping on public land. Because it's happening on public land, that becomes the issue there in terms of sheeting the fine to the private operator, if you understand what I mean in that particular instance, because I think these things I probably can't go into in terms of the detail on what staff have done with the operator there, but as I said, there's a number of issues in there. The fly tipping will increase the fine for that if we can find the person responsible for dumping the whiteware there. It won't address the issue of whether we can charge the activity that might encourage fly tipping there.
Just supplementary, in that case, thank you for your response, Madam C. I fully support this paper, because I do support us having mechanisms in order to be able to help control this activity that's happening in our community. Thank you very much.
Councillor Sheldrake.
Thank you. I support this, but does fly tipping go to the extent of vehicles? An example is on my morning bike rides. A week ago, I saw a car that's been banged up sitting outside the children's cycle path down by the beach. It was sitting there for about 4 days, and yesterday one of the windows is smashed on it and the car still sits there. So I'm interested to know if it would include vehicles also dumped outside that recycling business, and if there can be more teeth applied. So obviously I do support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you know,
Just might need to look to one of the directors over there if they know,
Mr. Wilson.
particularly around vehicles.
So through your worship, when it comes to vehicles on the side of the road, there's a process that needs to be undertaken whether or not the vehicle has been abandoned. So there's a process between the police and ourselves with time constraints as to before we're able to pick up and take the vehicles or move things around. So there's a setback period. If it's within the lifeline, then we deal with it. So it becomes an issue for our hub and lifelines. When it comes to being an abandoned vehicle, it has to have the status of an abandoned vehicle by the police, they're checked, and then it comes over, and then it will go to Ross Hannam and his team if they're able to take care of it from there.
Councillor,
So the answer is no, the fly tipping doesn't cover vehicles, so it will go to the last registered owner. The police will check that they will be charged under another registered owner.
so
it's
there's a
not-
different mechanism to recoup those costs.
It's a shame because they're everywhere.
Councillor Akuata Brown and then Councillor Dowsing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I remember growing up as a young'un, there was this really strong message called "Be a Tidy Kiwi." And, my husband and I were debating this the other week because we're a part of a project that is often picking up rubbish at a space that we've been working on, the skate park. And so I've wondered within our remit space of a solution as such, whether we need to go back to simple messages. They were on a little bit of mechanisms to be a tidy Kiwi. And so when I look at this issue, I think back to a whole framework of why we get to this point where people aren't affording to dispose of their waste appropriately. And in one point I had Housing New Zealand help a group of residents in one part of town with some bins they provided so they could get rid of the excess waste due to the costs. With the remit, I appreciate it, and thank you to the work that goes into these spaces. But I'm always wondering, what are we able to do at this side of things, respect to the costs that we know many whānau are not affording to take their waste to the appropriate spaces to dump, and of course not feeling, I guess, enough respect to the region to not dump it in beaches and backyards and whatnot. So I just am asking, in the remit, is there space to consider what is a mechanism, or what is the tool being used to promote and consider a message of don't dump it, you know, be a tidy Kiwi, those mechanisms, because I don't see those kind of messages around as much anymore. They're quite simple, but they had a profound impact on us kids growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And so now, so can we as council consider those messages on our little boxes, or can we push for a national solution in respect to reminding people of their responsibility as citizens? Just some thoughts. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Through worship, so that's through our waste minimisation activity. That's the area within which we undertake public campaign. This mechanism is really about increasing the level of fines for the fly tipping.
Thank you. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. I may be the odd one out here, but I want to speak against this remit, only because I'm a little bit cynical about what will actually get through at the local government level and what will achieve traction and be delivered. I think this is this will be difficult for councils to grapple with, and whether it will actually apply any opportunity to those councils. It's already acknowledged by our staff how difficult it is to identify the perpetrator and then to go through and essentially prosecute that issue. And if they challenge it, then it's not going to be worth. It's never going to be worth going to court over. So it's a very difficult to manage issue, and I don't know that we actually achieve anything by it. I think we would be better served by taking some of our budget that we have for this current problem and putting it into a whiteware receptacle somewhere that so we have an approved removal location and we can deal with it appropriately instead of having it dumped on the side of the road. I think putting additional recycling receptacles in some of our neighbourhoods instead of seeing it all dumped down the side road, those are solutions that council can take that can have immediate impact, whereas this is asking someone else to solve a problem with a mechanism that we don't even know will work. So I don't think this is the way for us to go forward. I think that we can be smarter about how we approach rubbish in general. But yeah, I just wanted to say that I won't be in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussions, Councillor Hughes?
So mine's just a question of clarification around, so the cost of dumping is around 85 grand a year, disposing the dumping?
Yep.
And our current fine pool that we receive?
Ms. Foreman, current pool of
currently-
money we get in.
Currently, in the last few years, we've had none been able to successful prosecutions.
Did you say none?
Zero.
Zero. Oh. Anyone else? Councillor Burdett.
I support it. Whether we will be able to recoup and recover any costs is another thing. Fly tipping and the dumping of vehicles is prevalent right throughout the rural sector, and there's not a hell of a lot we can do about it apart from send our staff out or contractors to recover it. Whether we get any financial returns back is another thing. Most of them that I've observed when they've been snarling at me, there is actually identification in some of those rubbish bags that we could do something about.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Yep.
So my question is just if if it was possible to recoup, like at the moment it's fixed, right? Unless you're going to take a full prosecution, you can only recoup $400. Does that have an impact on the degree of effort we put into identifying and therefore issuing fines, knowing that the effort to issue that fine may well cost more than $400?
So what you're saying maybe then, if we know there's more money that can be in, there might be a different effort to the...
I think just picking up on Meredith's point as well, to presume that everyone who dumps can't afford, there are no doubt a proportion and possibly even the majority of people who do, who can't afford that. And I completely agree with Shannon. We need other mechanisms to address that. But there are also people dumping building waste. There are people who are just not acting responsibly in our region, who should know better. At the moment, there are no repercussions because everyone knows they're never going to get a fine. If the Salvation Army, for example, knew that they had a camera sitting on their building that showed everybody's vehicle who rocked up with their bags and bags of rubbish to dump outside their building, do you think people would still do that? Knowing that they were going to get a bill in the mail for $550 because that's what their big pile of old crap cost us to get rid of. So I just think it's another tool. It's not the answer, don't get me wrong. It's definitely not the answer. I don't think any one thing is ever going to be the answer. But at the moment, we have so few tools, and it seems ridiculous that at one end of the spectrum, you've got $400, which is already unaffordable for lots of people. And at the other end, you've got to actually go to court. You know, that's bizarre. So hence this coming to here, to this table. I'm not wedded to it. If you don't pass it, it's absolutely no skin off my nose. It just means I didn't feel like I did nothing. So thank you.
So what you're trying to say is we all acknowledge we do have a big issue in our region with fly tipping happening everywhere. Down my road, at least 2-3 times a month, there's a trailer load with old mattress, old TV and nonsense in there. So people are not acting like tidy Kiwis. So what we are saying is at this stage, we only have either on the one end a $400 fine or then going to court. This might be a bigger incentive for council to follow through because the process cost a lot of money and a lot of investigation. And it's true what you say, this is not the silver bullet, but it might be one of the tools alongside education, obviously, as Councillor Akawata-Brown said as well. You know, those simple campaigns like the Tidy Kiwi was quite effective. Even where I grew up, we had a Tidy Springbok. But it is. So anyway, so how do you feel about this? Because I need to take this to Local Government New Zealand and be confident about it. If people are hesitant around this, I'd rather not take it. So this is your time to nut this out. Councillor Akawata-Brown.
Thank you for that. I was going to say, sorry, Madam Chair. I just, know that this is a big issue. Oh, let me just stand first. This is an issue, I guess, for multiple councils. So we are lining up, I guess, with our other sisters and brothers in the space. Respect to the costings and all the frameworks that cost to take it through a court process, what we're trying to say is we have a huge issue with the affordability around waste, particularly whiteware and other larger mattresses. It costs my husband and I $45 to take a mattress to a dump in Porirua. So it is a costly venture. So we're asking local government really to kind of consider this whole issue, because we know it's in all councils currently. We just looked up some news reports. But for me, maybe the remit is about the bigger picture in respect to this issue. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, I do think this is important, and fly tipping is but one aspect, and I do think we should be encouraging, and I'm sure you will get support from other local authorities. With respect to common disposal, and some of us are old enough to remember that has been available in this town in the past and in suburbs, but regrettably they end up being abused and frequently filled with livestock entrails, heads and skins and things that are not what they're there for. So rubbish is a really big issue, and I'd like to ask the Chief Executive if on the different tack to deal with the whiteware and all those things, that we actually have a more advanced education campaign, because we haven't done anything for some time that I've noticed, and education is really important. But this is just but one aspect, and I do think we should support the remit that Councillor Worsnop put forward.
Councillor Hughes and then Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, so I do share Councillor Dowsing's concerns about potentially the staff costs and putting it in the legal lottery. I think why I do support this remit is if we happen to have a one-off event of, say, 100,000 dumping, K worth of dumping, and it's not an average of 85 grand per year, then this gives us a tool to deal with that, which isn't happening, but if it does happen, I think having a tool is better than nothing.
Councillor Cranston, thank you.
Yeah, similar point really. For me, it's absolutely clear that the reason I would support this, if we could get some recovery, is that the other ratepayers shouldn't be paying the $85,000. You know, I don't care if it's unaffordable for someone to not not dump their rubbish in an appropriate way. They have chosen to put that cost onto other ratepayers who can't afford it. So it's really just as simple as that. Having been around here for a while and tried to follow up on a few of the fly tipping experiences that we have had, it isn't that easy. I know we got a big one at Makaroi one year, and I clambered down the cliffside, and there was quite a bit of documentation there that had names and addresses in there, but it still wasn't deemed to be proof enough. You know, so that's a bit of a shame, but that does happen. The fact that you do get a name and address still doesn't ensure that you're going to be able to get this funded.
Okay, so I've got a mover and a seconder. If no one else wants to say anything, all in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you. That brings us to the end of our meeting. Thanks a lot. Public part of our meeting.